Hi, we're very happy to have you all here. So welcome to a new webinar from World Languages. As you can see, this one is titled Selecting and Adapting Authentic Resources for the World Language Classroom. We're always happy to bring you new professional development opportunities, and we believe this is a relevant topic that is going to be of your interest. Now I will give word to my colleague Rosie, who is going to present our fantastic presenters for tonight.
Thank you, Sabrina. My name is Rosie Freeman, and I work for World Languages. I'm a World Language Program Consultant for the West Coast of the United States. I'm coming to you all today from a very rainy Phoenix, Arizona, but I do make my way around quite a bit of the US, visiting teachers and administrators as part of my work. So it is my pleasure to introduce our two guests today, Jen Hoban and Sharon Grell. Sharon, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
No, it's Greyley, but that's okay.
Greyley. Okay, I was pronouncing it kind of like it were French. Greyley, love it. Okay, so Jen Hoban is president of the Kentucky World Language Association. She's also chair of the World Language Department and French teacher at Louisville Collegiate. And she has taught all levels of French from kindergarten to college. She's also an item writer for the ACTFL AAPPL test. And then Sharon Greyley is principal of Kirby Middle School in Memphis, Tennessee. She previously was a French and Spanish teacher for 25 years. Wow. And she has presented at conferences at the regional and national levels on a variety of world language topics. She was also a part of the standards writing team for the state of Tennessee in the last standards process that they went through. So welcome both of you, and I'm super excited to be here. And I will go ahead and put on to you. You bet.
We're super excited to be here as well. And we welcome all of you to our webinar this evening. I'm Sharon, and Jen is my co-host this evening.
Hi, everybody. It's so exciting to be here. We're just going to go through a quick agenda to say what we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing we're going to be discussing is what makes for an authentic text. It might seem obvious, but we want to make sure it's very clear for everybody. The second thing we're going to talk about is how to select texts that are appropriate for your classroom. The third thing we're going to do is review the ACTFL proficiency guidelines. I'm going to do some practice leveling where you'll be able to participate and guess the levels of different texts. We're going to talk about how to adapt text for the classroom. So if you find a text that's not quite right, but has a lot of the good bones, we're going to talk about how to make it right for your classroom. And before we actually get started, we'd like you to click on this Padlet and say, what is an authentic text? A newspaper article, definitely an authentic text, right? That would definitely work. What else is coming up here? Anything written in the target language that's meant for public use and not designed for a textbook specifically. A song, yes. It's a text written by a native speaker for native speakers.
Yep. Text written in the target language, such as an advertisement, infographic, song.
Perfect. Anything that's to transmit information in the target language. Oh, so many good things in here. For native speakers, I'm seeing that word used a lot. All right, so we have a lot of good things here. So I'm going to jump back to what we have, and we're going to repeat some of these ideas, and I think we have a few additional ones. Sharon, do you want to go over what a definition of an authentic text is for us?
Sure. And as many of you stated correctly, an authentic text is defined as written by members of a language and culture group for members of that same language and culture group. But we also need to talk about the definition of text itself, because a text does not have to be just the written word. Text is any material that includes but is not limited to the written word. You could have a text that's a visual, film, statues and artwork, postcards, as someone said, magazine articles, songs, social media posts, all of those things, maps are considered text. It does not only have to be written. And I saw a lot in the Padlet of the written word, but just know it does not have to be a written word. If you look at some of these images that come from the Reporter textbook, we have some murals. We have, I think it's a postcard for an event in Canada. And then we have a picture of, a wonderful looking place that you could visit. Those are all examples of authentic text, even though there may not be a lot of written words there. And there's a lot you could still do with those. So we just wanted to make sure we were on the same page with our definition of an authentic text as we got started.
So what is the purpose of looking at or using authentic text in the classroom? Interactive reading and listening comprehension tasks are designed using authentic cultural materials, and we can scaffold those up and create follow-up tasks that allow the students to interpret them. I'm going to dig into that a little bit more, but scaffolding refers to the support that we give our language learners, and we can do that through many different ways, whether it's pre-reading activities, whether it's support that we add into the text themselves with pictures or ways to help them understand a little bit better. But it's really important to help them grow their understanding, but also find it so that it's an experience that's not too difficult and challenging. Well, we want it to be a little bit challenging, but not overwhelming for them. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the selection process and how to select the right resource for the right moment. So I'm going to talk about what the wrong resource is, starting with, things that can be. Sometimes we have really good intentions, but then we choose something that's just not right. And if we choose the wrong resource, it can be discouraging. And we all know that language learning can be very intimidating. And if we give a text that is way above a student's proficiency level, they can get frustrated. And I've noticed in my career that when they get frustrated, that's when they start to lean towards using dictionaries too much or Google Translate, because they just don't understand. And when they're looking for a way out of the situation. So trying to keep it so it's not discouraging to our novice and intermediate learners. Also, the wrong resource can be simply ineffective. If it's too high, they're not getting out of it what we wanted them to get out of it. We want it to be at their level or just a little bit above so they can grab onto new ideas, new concepts. So we don't want it to go too high, but at the same time, we don't want it to be too low. If you're giving students something that is way under their proficiency level, they're not going to grow their language skills. And also, if it's way, way below their age level, it can be ineffective too, because they might be turned off by it. So really thinking about making it an effective text. And then finally, it can be dangerous if we're not considering the cultural stereotypes that might be presented in a text, or reinforcing the same old thing that they've heard a million times. And we're just making the culture very narrow. We don't want to do that. So we want to make sure that our texts are broadening their understanding of culture and giving them new perspectives. So Sharon's going to talk about what a good resource can be.
So the right resource is going to build their confidence. It's really exciting to be able to read something in a target language for the first time. I remember when I used to teach middle school Spanish and French, and they would come back from being somewhere and traveling. Miss Grayley, I read this all by myself and I understood everything. Or I went to a restaurant and I was able to order. That's just that confidence builder that you get when you're successful at a task like that. So we want to make sure that we set them up for that success so they get those moments where they feel really excited and really proud and really confident. We don't want to push them towards using Google Translate and some of those other tools. And if we give something that is way too high for their level, that's what they're going to do, just because they get too frustrated and they think they have no choice. So we want to make sure we choose right down that butter zone so that we can help build their confidence and we don't push them towards that cheating. We also want to develop their linguistic competence. And so many times after my students have worked with authentic resources, I see either vocabulary or structures or just things creeping in that I didn't even realize I was teaching them, because it's they've gotten it out of that resource by the repetition or by, us talking about it, or, the scaffolding I gave them. So that comprehensible input that's coming from those authentic resources is really, really important. And finally, we want to make sure that we are showcasing the products and practices of our languages that we teach and developing that cultural competence. We certainly don't want to go back to having those culture Fridays where that's what we do is just teach culture. We should be embedding culture in everything we do every day. And that should be a part of these authentic resources if they're well chosen from the sources that we have, so that we embed all of those things in their daily activities and in that comprehensible input.
So when you're selecting an authentic resource, it's important to consider the following things. Is the text age appropriate? And I mentioned that earlier. We don't want something for teenagers that's necessarily meant for adults. They're not going to have the same interest level. We want it to be interesting to them and age appropriate. And the same thing with using things that may be for very young children. Now, sometimes kids can get into storybooks, but if you see your students turned off by it and they're just reacting badly, then it's not going to work for them. We want them to be engaged and we want them to be interested in it. Making sure it's level appropriate, so not too high proficiency level, not too low, as we mentioned. We want it to be engaging, whether that's through the topic, whether that's through the presentation, whether it's the discussion. We want kids to be excited by these texts, and it's not just a challenge, and it's not a chore, not just a task to complete, but something to really dig into. If possible, we'd love it to offer a new perspective on the culture or the cultures of the target language. And then the last thing, is it culturally relevant and respectful? So that goes back to we don't want to go into those stereotypes, and we don't want to add in perspectives that put the culture in a negative light. Really making sure that we're respectful and giving tasks that help grow our students as global citizens.
So we wanted to get a sense for our audience. Go ahead. And if you would either scan the QR code, or they'll drop the link in the chat where you can put in the proficiency level that you teach. Are you teaching novices? Are you teaching intermediate and advanced? And we know that in the world language, arena, we all teach multiple levels. I've taught, 3 and 4 levels at the same time. So you may have more than one, but if you have kind of one that the majority of your learners fall into, go ahead and select that in the poll. You can scan the QR code with your phone, or you can click on the link in the chat and that'll pop it in the poll, and we'll be able to see that come up.
So Sharon, I'm currently teaching novice high to intermediate low students, and then upper intermediate students. That's where I'm falling right now in my classes, although I've been from novice low all the way to advanced low. But I tend to ride the intermediate wave pretty frequently. Oh, and I'm seeing that from our participants too. We have novice, we have intermediate, and a few teaching at the advanced level. But most high schools teachers are going to be in the novice and intermediate for the most part, right? Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is recognizing proficiency levels. And I know all of us probably have trained somewhat with proficiency levels, but I know that I have to frequently go back and refresh myself. What can a novice really do? What can an intermediate do? Sometimes I, try to push too hard or take it down a level, so I have to go back and look at those actual guidelines. Sharon, did you want to go over these quickly?
Sure, you want me to? So these come right from the actual can-do statements and the proficiency benchmarks. Novices are really at the kind of word phrase level. They'll recognize some very simple sentences, especially those highly practiced structures and that high frequency vocabulary that, the ones that our units are usually built around. Very familiar topics they do well with. They can't do anything abstract, of course, but they can do that concrete pretty well. Intermediate, we get into the main idea of a text, as well as maybe some additional information in that text on familiar topics, especially ones that we've studied and worked with. We move to the sentence level and then to connected sentences later on if we're talking about the spoken and written word, especially as we get into those higher levels of intermediate. We know that that progression will kind of happen. We do a little bit more with text, and we can get into a little bit of the details, maybe not all of them, but we certainly are doing better with that than the novices. And then at the advanced level, we get the main message and a lot of the supporting details. We're much more able to handle timeframes or paragraphs and structures where there's sequencing that's important to understanding what's going on. Advanced do really well with that. And they can do, text or spoken in multiple paragraphs by that point, and various timeframes. Really at the advanced level is when we're really comfortable with those. Doesn't mean that our upper intermediates can't use those or recognize those, but it's at the advanced level that we start to get really comfortable with them.
I always think that's fascinating. That's one piece that I always, so many of us teach different time frames and tenses in the intermediate zone. And to get my head around, it's not really until upper intermediate and advanced that they really get comfortable with them. And just always trying to keep that in the back of my mind. So we're going to start off by actually looking at a text from Les Reporters. So this is from the textbook that Clet has just released. And we want to take a look at this, and we want you to tell us what proficiency level you think it might be. So have a look at it really quickly. Take in the sentences, and if you're not a French speaker, maybe you can get some ideas just from the frame of the sentences. And there's a QR code on the bottom right, and Marie is going to put it in a link in the chat. We'd love you to tell us what proficiency level you think this is. Was it novice, intermediate, or advanced? We're not going to get into sub-levels, just a general proficiency level. So I'm going to see if I can see those responses.
Well, interesting. I got them.
Oh,
We've only got
see them
so far, but we're getting a few, so that's interesting.
Sharon, can you share is there a trend?
Yeah, let me refresh again and just see. We've got 5 that say novice and 10 that say intermediate so far. I saw in the chat, I saw 1 advanced, 1 novice, and 1 intermediate. So I think we're hitting kind of across the board here with what people are thinking. So I think that's great that we have some differences on this, because it gives us something to talk about as we move forward. And as Jen said, this is from the Reporters Francophones Clet textbook. So this is an authentic resource that they're using in there. And
so,
why don't you go to the next slide, Jen?
Do you want to talk about the advanced, intermediate, or novice, or shall I do that?
You can go ahead and do it.
Okay. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. We're going to look at intermediate and novice and try to get those back in our head with a little bit more detail. So intermediate, heavily using contextual clues. The text is familiar vocabulary on very familiar topics, everyday activities. It's not complex. It has a predictable pattern. It's made up of strings of sentences with high frequency vocabulary. Intermediate level readers are able to understand the messages. That's the general idea, not get into those very big details, but some details perhaps. And they're going to struggle with time frames, right? The novice, however, is just looking at keywords and cognates and some formulaic phrases that have maybe memorized or highly contextualized. They can understand a limited amount of information, has to be very predictable. They're relying a lot on their own knowledge, not just of language, but just of the world to make sense of things. And, they are able to anticipate some information in the text, but like I said, not from the language, but more from their own personal understanding. They do know formulaic phrases and, memorize phrases, but it's pretty limited. So let's look back at this text. This text is 61 words in length. It has some strategies to help you understand it. It has images of some of the key ideas, and it has some translation of some of the trickier words down here. The context, it's connected to everyday life. It's made up of connected sentences and short descriptive text. It's written in the present tense, and it includes high frequency vocab and specialized words related to survey results. So when we look at this text, if this text existed by itself, right, without the support of these pictures, without the support of translated words, this would be an intermediate level text. And what's interesting here is what Clet has done to make this intermediate text accessible to novices is by putting these pictures down here, right? And pulling out those keywords. So now a novice has something to grab hold of. You know, they're going to look at this and try to make sense. They're going to know it's a survey because they're seeing those percentages. They're going to know the key vocabulary because they've got the images connected to it. And then when they go to the text, they've got something to work with. And novices need that something to work with. And so while it is an intermediate text based off the proficiency guidelines, it's accessible to novice.
And as Jen and I have often talked about, what you do with that text is really what's going to decide whether you're going to use it more as an intermediate text or whether you're going to use it more as a novice level text. If you were really just asking some basic kind of tasks there of your students and using more of the picture scaffolding and some of those numbers that are easily recognizable, could be very well accessible for novices. But if you were relying more on the paragraph and they had to pull out some of that key information and use some of that specialized vocabulary, it might be more of an intermediate activity. It all depends on how you choose to use it, which is a big piece of using authentic resources. So I'll talk about this one. This is another authentic resource from the same textbook. This one is about food and, bien manger, bien vivre. So if you want to take a minute and put in your guess as to the level of this text, what is its proficiency level? Once again, you can scan the QR code that's right there, or they've put the link in the chat if you just want to click on it, and then you can put in what you think is the proficiency level of this text. And then we'll see what y'all think. So we've got a few answers so far. Definitely a trend developing here. Interesting. Definitely leaning heavy, heavy, heavy towards the novice. Heavy, heavy, heavy towards the novice.
All right, so let's dig into it then and get some more information about this text. Go ahead, Sharon.
The facts about this one is there are 45 words. There is an image and a title. And the text is actually linked to the images, which is also a scaffold to help understand this text. Very relevant to everyday life. Food is one of those units we all study. Written in very short sentences in the present tense. In fact, I think they're all commands. And then very high frequency vocabulary words. There are a few specialized words such as savourer and sain, but for the most part, these are fairly common words that students would have learned in a unit about food. So if we took the text just by itself, and this is what the image says without the picture, and imagine we presented that to students, we might go, ooh, that may or may not be so novice, which is where everybody kind of leaned in our poll here. It was 27-2 in favor of novice over intermediate. It's starting to look a little less novice friendly, right? If we look at just the text that's there, we've got some pretty big words, consommer, aliment, grain entier. I mean, we've got some vocabulary there that's a little bit higher level. However, once we put it back in that image and we link it to what's there, and they realize that, oh, in that quadrant of the plate that we're talking about, all those grains and breads and things like that, now they've got that support there. So while I think the text itself, meaning purely the words that are written, leans more towards the intermediate, this is definitely very novice friendly. Very well scaffolded, very well supported with that image, something that is totally doable for a novice learner, depending on your task. Once again, if your task asked them to use a lot of the image to support whatever you were asking them to do, then it would be totally doable. If your task was really focusing more on the written words and some of those details, might be more intermediate friendly. Just depends. Great image, because I think you could stretch it across levels, and it's a great resource.
All right, so we have one more text to look at. So we're going to do the same thing. The QR code is in the bottom right. And once again, this is a authentic text from Les Reporters Francophones, take a look at this and take that QR code, or in the chat, there's the link, and tell us what proficiency level you think it is. Sharon, can you share some of the results as they're coming in?
I will, yeah. As soon as we get a couple, we've only gotten 3 so far, so I don't want to give away too much till we've had everybody a chance to answer. I'm seeing some things in the chat too. So between the two, I'll kind of give you an overview in just a moment. Okay, so we've got, I think, a couple people are now saying in the chat, depends on what you want to do with it. True. You're picking up on that trend a little bit. Overwhelmingly, we're seeing novice as kind of the overwhelming vote, if you will. Some of you in the chat are getting even a little bit more specific and saying novice mid to novice high. So I think that's great that you're already thinking that specifically about this. So Jen, you want to go over the facts about this text?
Right. So this one has 33 words. So the text is a lot shorter. With the words, there's a lot fewer words. It includes a graph with icons and a title. It's relevant to everyday life. And there's only actually one sentence on the whole infographic. That's just the title. And the rest are just phrase chunks. And they're all written in the present tense. Actually, they're all infinitive verbs. They're not even conjugated. It's just to do this, to do that. And there's super high frequency vocabulary, right? This is about everyday activities, watching TV, listening to music. With all of that together, this is about as novice friendly as you can get, right? Just looking at this text, this is 100% novice. Of course, you could give it to maybe a little bit higher level class and have them talk about it, but they're going to maybe have much more interesting things to discuss than this. This is pretty simple, gets to the point, but very novice friendly.
So here's some takeaways just from about our proficiency levels. Every time that you're considering using an authentic text or an authentic resource, remember to consider its proficiency level. That is really, really important because we don't want students to be asked to be performing way above where they really are or too far below where they are. If that last image, if I brought that to a late Spanish 2 class or a French 2 class, it's a French image, they'd probably look at me like, why are we doing this? This is way too easy. So make sure that you're really kind of gauging that and keeping it in mind so that we don't frustrate our students or bore our students. Also, it's really good to frequently refresh yourselves on the ACTFL proficiency guidelines. It's something we do regularly, Jen and I, with our work with ACTFL, just to stay kind of up to date. And because I think as speakers of the language, we tend to, it becomes easy for us and we kind of get things that are getting a little bit too hard just because they're easy for us and we forget what those levels are. So kind of renorming ourselves and recentering on those proficiency levels is a really good practice. And to sit down with the text and go, what is this proficiency level? Am I really, staying true to what ACTFL says about that? And then we are going to move into this next. So if a text is above the level that you want to use it for, what can you do to make it more accessible? And we're going to talk about some strategies for that in just a few minutes, where we get into the portion of our webinar, which is going to be about adapting authentic resources for the classroom.
Yeah, so I don't know about you, Sharon, but the amount of hours I've spent of my teacher life looking for authentic resources, I don't even want to go there. And I find things that are the right topic, they have some of the right elements in it, but are just too high or too low. So I pass on to something else. And a few years ago, I kind of came to realization, well, how can I take something that's almost there and make it work, right? Saves time for me. There's something out there, but I want to just change it a little bit to make it adaptable. So that's what we're going to talk about. Not huge changes, but just small things that you can do to support the students in your classroom and their comprehension of text. Maybe I just answered some of those questions, but okay. We have a Padlet again. What issues have you had finding resources? What are some of the things you come into when you're searching the web, looking for that perfect resource? So it's going to be in the chat. Once again, there's a Padlet. If you could put some of your ideas on there, that would be great. It can be challenging, right?
It certainly can. As you said, the hours that I've spent looking for the perfect resource. And can we get that link in the chat for people to put up on the Padlet? they're going to, there it is, there's the Padlet.
Awesome.
So if you want to go ahead and put some responses in there. Yeah, I already saw one answer in the chat, the time consuming factor. It is, you can go down that rabbit hole and you can go deep down that rabbit hole of trying to find those resources. You know, I may have only had 45 minutes of a planning period and I start looking for one resource and that 45 minutes is gone. Time consuming quickly, some of those things that we've been talking about will give people a chance. Too much information way above level. Yep. Vocabulary that's not high frequency. Yep. Finding vocab that's on the unit that you're doing. I agree. That's the one that we always struggle with. Grammatical errors. Yes. You know, these are written by real people. People make mistakes and finding things. School blocking the sites. Oh boy, was that a frustration of mine. You'd find like the perfect video at home where you weren't on the school's filter and then you'd go to use it and it wouldn't load on the school's filter. So yeah, that was always a good one. Dead ends, links that get broken to, a link that you had maybe the year before that worked great and then now it's gone. That was the tough one. Somebody said this too, age appropriate and level appropriate, you know, teaching high school students that are true novices just starting off the language. That's really hard to find novice friendly for that age group that's not babyish. And that's always, they do it a little bit better in middle school, but it's hard. Sensitive to socioeconomic issues. I agree. I struggle with this even right now in my school, because I work in a very socioeconomic challenge school, Title I in Memphis, Tennessee. Finding resources just even in the English classroom that speak to my kids and represent them and are appropriate. So lots of great, sometimes articles that are too long. Love that one too. Inappropriate topics, they would make for good content if they were appropriate. Yep. So I think we got a great starting place. Y'all have summed up nicely a lot of our frustrations too with this.
I mean, we can all relate, right? And we've all been there. We've all done all of those things.
Yeah. So before we start on this topic though, we do need to acknowledge that we know that this is somewhat controversial out in the foreign language community, right? As soon as you start touching, adapting an authentic resource, is it authentic anymore, right? Well, yes, obviously we know this is a controversy, but we're never going to find that perfect resource, right? It's 1 in a million shot that you're going to find it as is, that you can use it. So what we're going to say is it's okay to adapt. We're not saying rewrite completely the whole thing. We're not saying chuck, the baby out with the bathwater. There's some strategies you can use that will keep as much of that authenticity as possible, but make it a resource that becomes usable in your classroom with your level of students. So we just wanted to acknowledge that and know that, yes, there are purists out there that are going to say, don't touch it. It's not authentic as soon as you change anything. It's okay. You can adapt an authentic resource to make it work. We're giving you that permission if you need it.
And what we're going to show you is it's not changing it dramatically. It's just clever tricks to making something that's almost there workable for your students. And that's what it's all about. It's our students, right? We teach for our students and we want them to feel good, have success, grow their linguistic skills, grow their cultural competency. So if there's something that's almost there but not there quite, let's just change it. And these are we're going to go to some different strategies that can help you do that. So some of the things we're going to talk about is choosing just a small part of the text rather than a whole long article, adding an image or a title for support, changing just a few keywords to help it make it comprehensible, potentially changing a tense, using a graphic instead of words or with the words, and then different ways to scaffold before, during, after, all of the different things to help make students more successful with these interpretive tasks. So the first thing we're going to talk about is choosing a small part of text, and I'm going to let you talk about it, Sharon.
Okay. So our first one is, this is a wonderful site. If you're a French teacher and you don't know it, you should definitely go visit it. Un jour en actu. They have videos and articles in French. They're written for kids, but not super, super young kids. So they're very, very accessible, especially Butterzone for those intermediates. Some of them are long, however. It's un jour en actu. It's on the bottom right-hand corner there, you'll see it. So this was an article about pollution in a city and how they're trying to reduce that by putting these new stickers on cars, and you can only drive in certain zones with certain stickers and all that. If you were giving this to students, even at an intermediate level, let's say, intermediate low, even to intermediate mid, this is a lot. There's a lot going on here. There's, big paragraphs of text, even though it's nicely scaffolded with some images and things like that, this may be too much for your students. So here's one idea. Take a chunk of it. What if you took a key idea paragraph, kept whatever image that you wanted to, and just use that chunk of that text? This is a lot more intermediate friendly. Same article. We have not done anything except take a subset of it and make it much more user friendly. And then we can put a lot of different scaffolds in place to help them understand this, because this still has some pretty specialized vocabulary. Things like une vignette. And that would lead to a whole conversation about what stickers do we put on our cars? What inspections do we have to have? Those kinds of things. What's an amende? Have you ever gotten one? How much did it cost? So you can scaffold with those kinds of things for this text as well that make it much more accessible. And all we've done is taken that great big article and chunked it down to a smaller, more bite-sized, manageable piece for our students. And maybe you start with this. And if they really like the topic, you bring out the rest of the article. I mean, that's a possibility. When I taught Spanish 4, they loved to talk about topics like this. Don't ask me why. They were into big topics like this. We discussed crazy things sometimes. Pollution in cities was one of them. School boards and making rules for schools was another one. I don't know, who knew. But so you might want to use the rest of that article in another way later on.
Yeah. So as you said, we didn't touch this article really. We just took out certain parts and the main ideas and put them together. And as you were talking, Sharon, I was thinking you could even just start with the picture, right? And just start, what's going on in this picture? Have you ever seen a sign like this in your community? And then show this small text and kind of scaffold it up. And if the ultimate goal, if you're teaching upper intermediate and your ultimate goal is to get to that full article, that's a nice way to do it. That's going to encourage the students, build their comprehension and their confidence. So when they look at that text, they're not overwhelmed by it. Because when they see something big, they just shut down, right? If it's too hard and too much. So the other thing we can do is add an image or a title. So this is an article or an authentic text from Les Reporters again, and it's about les vide-greniers. And that is not a very novice-friendly word, les vide-greniers. Even intermediates are probably not going to know what a vide-grenier is. But as soon as you add the picture, you start to go, oh, okay, I can see what a vide-grenier is, right? So by just the support of a picture. And I do this all the time, that I find an article that I love online, it has no pictures, I'll find the chunk and I'll add in a picture or two, maybe add a title to give some more context before we actually read the paragraph. It just helps the kids get into it. And the novices, they need that. They need that so desperately. They have to have the frame around it to help them understand the words, right? They're not relying on the text so much as the context around it. So adding in that picture of le vide-grenier, now we know what it is. Now we can start to have a look at the text and see if we can make sense of it, right?
And I just wanted to say, I saw some great questions popping up in the chat. We do have that 30 minutes at the end, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. So you can put those in that Q&A feature, and they're going to have a whole list of them. And then at the end, we'll answer as many as we possibly can of your questions. Okay, so please use that feature if you would, and that'll help things keep moving along. So we respect your time and all that. The next thing you can do is change a few words. Okay. If you find a good text on a topic that you're really interested in, changing a few words and making it a little bit more manageable is okay. And we're going to use an example in English here. This is an article about, I think it was from Time for Kids. Was that where we got this from? It's coming up in a minute, the link, but it was a little, if this was in a foreign language, this would be a little challenging for students, right? There's some pretty specialized vocabulary in here. And the main idea of this article was that dogs are like family members and they kind of mimic what the kids do. And if that was really the idea that we wanted to get out of it, what we did is we took a chunk of the text. You'll see that this comes from the section about a little more than halfway down. We've just taken out just a little bit of that paragraph, changed a few keywords because kid is more slang, and depending on the language you teach, it may not be user-friendly, whereas child might be a word that they know. And we took that main idea that dogs are more like siblings to kids, and that's what the study revealed, that adults, do the care things and children are their siblings. We added a title as well, which helps you understand what this text is about, but we really did keep pretty much the text the same as we were going through it, by just chunking it and then changing a few words to make it a little bit more user-friendly.
Yeah, so this has made it, almost novice, upper novice, lower intermediate friendly, which was, more of an advanced text, right, going on over here. We had there's some tenses going on. There's some very specific language, and like you said, we only took a chunk of it down the bottom and just changed a few key words. But we kept the essence of the text. Okay, so the next idea you can do is to use a graphic instead or with a text. So once again, we have a pretty hefty text. And this is about the school day in different countries around the world. School is very novice level topic, or early intermediate, talking about our school days, our routines. A lot of us do that. And it's a topic that I find really interesting. But this text is not accessible to our early students, our novices and lower intermediates. But if we add a graphic, all of a sudden, it helps us get a lot of context. So once again, this is from Les Reporters. I think it's in Les Reporters.
Yeah,
it is. So it has a title. It has the different country names with the flags. You've got the schedule, and you've got the times of the classes and lunches. This is very novice friendly. And this is talking exactly about what's on the left. It's the same stuff. And it has all the same ideas in there. But this level on the right is going to be more accessible. Now, you could teach just the right, and just have a really good conversation with novices asking simple questions. What time does school start in France? What about in Germany? And so you could use this by itself in a novice level classroom. But if you wanted to hit that intermediate or higher intermediate, I would probably start with this, have that discussion. And now, okay, let's look at this text as a bit more, bit higher proficiency level. So just scaffolding that way makes it a lot more approachable. And I think it's almost magic, right? The graph just brings it to life. The understanding goes up so much from that. So here's the example of just the text with just the graphic without all of that text, and how you can use it in the classroom.
And then another way that you could adapt a text is if, as we talked about earlier, the upper, intermediate, and advanced are really where they're dealing with complex tenses, and they're able to handle those well. Often, I think we find authentic resources where they are just way too complicated grammatically for the kids to handle. So keeping the same topic, keeping the same ideas, but just simplifying the tense a little bit can be a way to make it a little bit more accessible and keep those same ideas if we find a good resource. This is one from Time for Kids about New Year's Eve traditions, I believe, or various traditions. I don't think they're only New Year's Eve. And it is written in tenses that would be challenging in certain foreign languages. There might be the difference between the imperfect and the preterite tense, and that they may not be able to really handle all that right then. So you could take this and keep the same ideas and just change the tense of those verbs. Take out as much of those complex tenses that you think your students couldn't handle. Also notice how we've just chunked this into smaller bite-sized pieces. Same text, just really divided, and the language is just ever so slightly changed We took out as many of the past tenses as we could without losing the meaning of this, instead of was started by, Patrick Flynn is the creator, right? That's just a simplified way of saying kind of the same thing. And so feel free to do that in your language as well. It just makes a text that would not be accessible to that level now something you can use in the classroom. Still a great resource to use because it's got great ideas, great cultural concepts, an interesting topic to talk about, and could lead to a whole discussion of traditions around different holidays and different cultures in different parts of the world and all that.
And we can do it the other way around too. Imagine you come across a text that's in the present tense and you're teaching, upper intermediates, and you want to really get them some practice with the preterite and the imperfect and all of those pieces together. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to take this authentic text and just change it a little bit so they get repetition of those forms you want them to see. Trying to find that perfect text that has the language, the proficiency level, and some of the grammatical concepts that you want them to get practice with. It's finding a needle in a haystack, right? But if you can take something and just tweak it to make it work for what you're trying to do in the classroom, your options just open up so dramatically, right? Okay, scaffolding. So this is another article from Les Reporters. And it's got quite a lot going on here. So I want you to take a look at it. I love how very quickly you see all of these images, right? There's pictures all over the place. And this is all short paragraphs. So that if you took the text and put it all together, this would be quite long, but it's chunked into smaller paragraphs. Each paragraph has a picture that's going along with it. There are titles that are bolded that help you kind of get the main idea before you even look at it. And then it also has these vrai, faux next to it. So this is quite a lot of information. It's a big text, but it has a lot of scaffolding within it in itself with those pictures, those titles, helping you out, and just the way it's broken up. And there's other ways that you could scaffold this too. One of the things, before even reading it or looking at it, I would have the students practice with like vrai faux, right? And maybe you could have the thumbs up vrai faux and talk about topics that are happening with your culture. So this text is all about stereotypes or things people believe about French food and French life. So you could perhaps do that about American culture. What are some things that people think? Is it true or is it false? So you can get some practice, like I said, with the vrai faux. The next thing is actually introducing some of these cultural icons. I know I'm really guilty of thinking that everybody knows everything about French culture. Sometimes, like, everyone knows what a baguette is, right? Everyone knows what camembert is, right? And a lot of our students don't. They really are not exposed to that. And so knowing your population before you even read that, finding some ways to introduce them to these icons, whether that's for cheese, showing them all the cheese, a map of France with all those cheeses on them so they can start to understand the culture of cheese in France. Showing a bakery with the baguettes, helping them understand what that is and how part of French life it is. So walking around the town with the baguette under your arm or something like that. And you could also show some memes or cartoons to help students understand some of the stereotypes that already exist. They may not have heard these, right? This might be new to them. So I'm gonna just go back one more second. So it's talking about camembert being the most sold cheese in France, that the croissant is the most popular pastry, the baguettes are the most eaten bread. Perhaps your students have heard this, perhaps they haven't. So you might have to give a little bit more context before you dig into this article.
And there are so
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. There's so many scaffolds in this text that are already there for your students. If you look under the image where it talks about the croissant, there are vocabulary words that were defined, and some ones that would not be commonly taught to students are there to help them out. We've got the picture of the croissant. So if a student didn't quite know what a croissant was, we definitely have that there. We have the color of vrai and faux. Vrai was in green, faux was in red, which helps students realize that it's a true false kind of thing going on. We've got that bolding of titles and paragraphs. those chunks are so, friendly to our readers, because they only have to focus on one thing at a time. And we could say, let's go to that paragraph on the croissant and just read that paragraph. Think about how doable that is for even a late novice learner. We're looking at 2 sentences and pretty high frequency vocabulary, petit déjeuner, weekend, enfant, mange, things like that. They're very doable. So this is if you just chunked this into this small activity, this would be something very, very doable for kids. And then
go ahead.
Go ahead, Jen, if you want to go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's hard being together, right? I mean,
it is. We're so used to talking to each other. We talk over each other too, as you've noticed.
Go ahead. It's all you.
Okay, I'll go. Also, think about the task that you're going to ask your students to do, and think about what level task you're going to be giving them. It's okay to do only part of an activity. Like these 4 questions came with that text. They were provided as an option. And I might only want to do 2 of them with my kids. Maybe 2's enough. I don't have to do all 4 just because there's 4 there. Maybe that middle one, number 2, is a great one to start our conversation on, is what do people eat for breakfast? And that's a great one. And I only want to do 2 and 3 that day. I think there's also some really good teacher practices to remember. In my school for literacy for kids who are learning to read, period, we focus a lot on annotating. And annotating text is so important as a reader strategy and getting to be a good reader. So remembering those kinds of things and having students highlight some keywords in a text as they go to answer questions, and annotate and write on the text. And even if they can't write in their textbook, make a photocopy and they can write on that. Remember some of our good, strategies. I do, we do, you do. Jen and I have talked about how we might do number 1 as I model it, and this is how it would be done. Number 2, we might do together, maybe even as a turn and talk and then share out. And then maybe number 3 is do alone and then share back to the group. Partner work is a great one as well. It builds that confidence before you have to share your answers with the larger group. So just things like that are scaffolds that would be great to do with an activity like this. This is all set up. I mean, we've got 4 questions. Choose the ones you want. Don't have to do the whole thing.
Yeah, and I love the creativity of using each question a little bit differently, right? As a whole class, as with a partner, by yourself. And the last one is almost like a mini project one. What's a specialty that's in your region? And you could have the small groups present that, right? So a really nice way to tie it back to culture, make some cultural competency and comparisons, and make it more interactive too. So things to keep in mind when you're selecting authentic resources. The first thing, refresh yourself on the ACWA proficiency guidelines all the time, and know yourself. Like, I know that I tend to run lower. That's just my style. I've taught middle school for years and years and years, and I taught upper elementary, and I tend to think things are too hard. So I know that about myself. And other people tend to give students things that are way above their proficiency level. So know yourself and what your tendencies are, and then go back to those proficiency guidelines and make sure you're giving your students the right thing. Partner with your colleagues. Sharon and I, we've chatted about an authentic resource for a long time, and I've said it's intermediate and she said it's novice, and we go back to those proficiency guidelines. And I've done that with my department too. We did an activity where I printed out different texts and we had conversations together. Really fun renorming activity and having those discussions. It's healthy. None of us are perfect with these. We have to go back to them and review them. If your text is level appropriate, your students shouldn't need to use a dictionary or Google Translate to make sense of it, right? And that's the big clue. When I start seeing my students get highly frustrated, wanting to look things up, I know I've done too high, right? Be mindful of the task you assign. So if you are giving something that you know is above the proficiency level, make sure you're asking very broad questions. Like, what is the main idea or the picture. You're not going to get into the details, right? So changing the task, if it's something you feel is really strongly you want your students to look at, change the task to make it accessible to your students. And then, as Sharon said, teach reading strategies, teach annotating, teach them to look for the title, teach them to look at the picture, teach them to look at the support that's around them before they delve into the text, right? And teach them, if it's a text that's not chunked, if it's something they're doing on some kind of test or exam that you didn't create and it's not chunked already, teach them to chunk it themselves. Like, okay, I'm only going to look at this part, then this part, so that they can learn to help themselves through the process a little bit.
And we have some big takeaways that we hope we're gonna leave you with, and we are closing up our hour, and then we'll be opening up for that question and answer period. Authentic materials are really great for helping gain cultural and linguistic competence, but for also building students' confidence in the target language. So we definitely want to make sure that we are using as many authentic materials as we can. It's okay to adapt a resource. We know that there are those purists out there that'll say, no, it's okay. We've shown you some ways to do that really do preserve the authenticity of the text. Even if it's just taking a chunk of it and working with a smaller piece of it and keeping it as authentic as possible, there's lots of different ways to adapt that will preserve that authenticity. Remember that authentic materials are not just readings or listening. We did focus on a lot of written examples here, but artwork, statues, things like that are also great sources of authentic materials. You don't have to do this by yourself. And I think somebody in the chat mentioned this. If I always did all of this by myself, I would be exhausted, right? And there's not enough time in my day to do this. If you have a professional learning community, a PLC in your school, or department members, you can work together and share and work on this, or use some of the great new textbook resources that are out there. A lot of textbook publishers have come a long way with this, being one of them, of providing really great authentic resources. If you don't have a group at your school, I was a singleton in middle school for many years. I was the only Spanish teacher. There's great online communities. There is people you can reach out to in various groups. Twitter is a great place. And I have asked for, hey, I'm stuck on an infographic for blah, blah, blah. Anybody got any ideas? And, within 5 minutes, I'd probably have 10 of them. So rely on the community that's out there. The world language community is a sharing and giving group in my experience. And there are lots of great experts out there. And just remember that you know your students and their needs better than anyone else, and you are the true expert on your kids. So doing what's right for them is really the most important thing. And if you know that adapting a resource is going to make it the right tool for your students, then by all means, go for it. Okay?
Absolutely. And I was just going to go back to a couple of resources. I know, particularly French teachers, and I'm sorry for the Spanish teachers, I'm not as knowledgeable, but AATF, the American Association of Teachers of French, has tons of resources that they put together and compile by theme and by proficiency level. They're wonderful. There's an amazing Facebook called French Teachers in the USA. Same thing. And then I was thinking of some different teachers, and I was thinking, for example, of Cécile Lenné, who writes Le Petit Journal Francophone. She does this. She takes articles and news articles that are happening in the French-speaking world and adapts them, ready to go. Each month there's a new one. So pretty shout out to her. I love using those with my upper intermediate classes. But people are already doing this, but sometimes, it's not out there. And the big thing we want you to know is feel free to make that adaptation. If it's there, it's close, make it work for your students. It's okay. And you're not doing anything wrong. You're teaching your students. And that's the whole point, right? Is growing with language and growing with a culture.
Thank you very much to both of you. It was a great presentation. I think it was also very clear, but let's pick up some of the questions that we had. So I'm going to just retrieve back your last comment, Jen, on some resources and alternative places where we can find those authentic resources. So one of the questions that we had is, in relation to un jour en actu. Sorry for my French. And the question was, do you recommend a similar website like that in Spanish?
There isn't one that's exactly the same. Un jour en actu is very much kid friendly, and kind of targets that upper elementary, lower middle school kind of age group in France. And kids get to write in about various topics, and then they answer them either with videos or articles. There is a video site that I've used a lot called Curiosamente in Spanish. It has like 5 minutes videos, and they have different topics. They put one out, every so often. So there's about 100 different videos. I would say screen them very carefully, because there are some topics that I would never do in a high school. But there were some great ones. I did one about animal rights. I did one, there was one about an illness. I can't remember which one it was that I did when we were doing like a medical theme. I would say they're a little higher level than Un jour en actu, so not quite as simple, but that was a great place for videos if you were looking for some videos. Curiosamente was the name of that site again. I'm trying to think of some of the other resources where I've found Spanish things. It's been a hot minute since I've been a Spanish teacher, so I got to think for a second.
Yeah, I'm not a Spanish teacher, so I can't really help with that. But I like looking for things that are meant for teenagers, or, like she said, lower middle school, because already it's kind of the level is already done somewhat for you. So I'm sure there's got to be some Spanish speaking teen newspapers or magazines. Those are great resources because their level for their ages, the topics are going to be interesting to the students, and already the language is already kind of leveled down somewhat for you. So it makes less work for you to adapt them.
Perfect. Thank you very much. On the same line, someone asked if you could share maybe some Twitter groups or some other websites in general for Spanish, and I would add any other languages that you teach and that we could share here.
I just thought of another resource that you can use. There's a website called Newsela. It's spelled Newsela, News ELA, basically. It's a series of articles on all different topics, and you can put in the search that you want. So if you're studying foods, or if you're studying holiday traditions, the great thing about that one is a lot of them, they will translate into Spanish automatically for you, or because they've been used in the Spanish speaking world. And you can adjust the level. I use this a lot actually currently in my school for our RTI class, which is a literacy intervention class. And we can scroll down, we can get the highest level, the mid-level, or the lowest level, and you can adjust that level in Spanish as well too. So Newsela is one other site that I would go to look for articles. I would say they tend to run on the longer side. So those would definitely be ones that I would chunk, and I would definitely, streamline down and pick and choose carefully. But that's another good resource you can use besides that. A Twitter group that's really good is LangChat. They are a group of language educators that get together. They often have chats on Thursday nights. I can't remember if it's every other Thursday or every Thursday. But so many language professionals together on that Twitter group. So LangChat would be a good place to go on Twitter.
On Twitter, if you're there too, there's also hashtag authres for authentic resource. When people find, it's mostly world language teachers who use that hashtag. And when they find something that's perfect for the language classroom, they post it with the hashtag authres. So AUTHRES. That's something to watch on Twitter too. I was thinking of a source that I like to use, and that's Statistica. They make graphs on basic information that's happening in the world. If you think back to that school day one we showed you, that was from Statistica. They have ones on language learning. I mean, any topic you can think of, they have a graph that shows that topic that's very visual. So look for that on any topic, whether it's like even transportation used in the United States, you could probably find a graph or graphic that's going to show you about it. And it does comparison between cultures too sometimes. So I like that one. And I'm trying to think what else.
There's the news in slow too. They take news clips and they slow them down a little bit. So news in slow Spanish, news in slow French. I don't know what other languages it exists in because I've only used it in Spanish and French, but I think the website is just news in slow and then the language after it, .com. And you could try that. First, they have some, audio clips and, videos of the news, but just slowed down.
Mm-hmm. And TV5 Monde has quite a few things for French students that are kind of leveled up. But in honesty, most of the time I'm going to Google. I'll go to my favorite teacher websites, the French teachers on Facebook. There's so much stuff there. But if I'm looking for something for myself, I'm just going to Google it. But I'll always put in like infographie and the topic, or I'll go to some of my favorite websites. Un jour en actu is where I often start. But I'll search it. But I'm not going to spend, and this is the whole point, is I'm not going to spend hours looking for that perfect one. I'm going to find something that's kind of there. Like, okay, this is workable, and I'm going to quickly adapt it, right? I'm going to take a chunk out, add a picture, call it a day, because my time is precious, and I know it's not necessarily out there. And so taking what I can find and making it work for my class by those adaptations is kind of key. And that's how I'm surviving, I guess, with the authentic resources.
Perfect. That sounds great. So, two things. Some people in the chat mentioned maybe while I ask the next question, if you could just type down some of those resources so they'll check them out later. Thank you very much.
Type that in there. So
thanks, Sharon. And Jen, you mentioned a statistica, or I think it says statista if I'm not wrong. The person asked, could you tell some more details about that?
Well, basically, they create infographics or just graphs on all different topics. So the one we saw was a school day, and it compared school day, but it could be anything. It could be on pollution in different countries. It could be on inflation. It could be on the cost of housing. So many different topics. It's just they make graphs off of information, and they do a lot of cultural comparisons. I don't know how to explain it very clearly, but just you'll be blown away when you start looking at that. And it's in French, it's in Spanish, it's in English. Everything they make is multilingual. So it has a lot of very cool resources that you can use to support a text or just as the text itself. It is what you're going to use. So take a look at it and play around. You'll find some neat stuff for sure.
Fantastic. That sounds great. So just to remind everyone that you're still on time to make some more questions. I'm just going to launch another one. And if there's nothing else, we can finish with this one, which is basically when you use some authentic resources that might have, for example, specific words or vocabulary from a specific country. For example, in Spanish, maybe you will find words from a specific variety of Spanish. Same with French. Do you usually think that we should adapt these words when making the class to make it more accessible for everyone, or just keep it there and try students to actually get into there and make the material more diverse?
I think I would not adapt that, but I think I would put a note underneath that gives that word in the more typical version that they may have heard, or maybe an explanation, if I could, in the target language of what that word means, and say that this is a word that's used a lot in whatever region or whatever country. I think them seeing a wide variety of language use is highly important. We don't want to restrict their cultural perspectives. We want to grow their cultural perspectives, but we want to make it comprehensible. So putting those two pieces together, I think that's the way I would lean, was to leave that word as is, but kind of put a note in there. Like I'm thinking in Quebec, chandail is a sweater, not the word I use in the classroom, not the word that necessarily can be seeing the most, but I would put underneath in French, in the typical French from France, pull. So I would put that underneath. Sharon, what do you think?
I agree totally. Yeah, I mean, I think there's certain words that are just so regional, but are so diverse and so rich, and that kids should see that because they may hear them, they may travel, and they may come across them. I was at a party just like 2 weeks ago with my school district and a lot of the district national level people. And we had a discussion about the word for banana in Spanish, because there's like 8 different words for banana in Spanish, depending on where you're from. And we talked about Spain and Mexico and, Honduras and all these different places and the different words for it. And it's just such a rich part of the culture. So I would definitely keep those in there and try to, either provide a synonym or, have a really hopefully rich discussion about the fact that there is this diversity of language. And kids get it, because if you bring up the whole England, Australia, US kind of language diversity and what we call an elevator is a lift and things like that, they start to realize like, oh yeah, we do this too. If I go to Britain, I'm going to hear different words for things. So I think it's a great discussion to have, and I would definitely keep those words in.
It might be a cool pre-reading activity to do actually too. And if there's a word like that has many different words associated in different cultures, like go through them and learn about it. So, and so present it as a big part of it and focus your attention on that to help the students grow. So I think that would be neat to talk about it beforehand and see if there's any other, parts of the language that has different words for it.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. I think for the moment, no one else has any questions. Everything was super clear. So once again, thank you both, Sharon and Jen. This was a great conversation. So before we finish, everyone, thank you all for joining us tonight. It was great having you here. I'm going to share here the link for our teacher training. Our next webinar will be in Spanish. It's this Thursday, and it's called Veo, el uso de recursos visuales en el aprendizaje de lengua. That's going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern time, so an hour before today. And our next webinar in English is going to be on the 14th of April so far, and it's going to be enacting a social justice-oriented language curriculum. So there you have the link for Thursdays if you want to sign up. I also want to put again the link for Le Reporter Francophone if you want to check it out. You can also always request a sample. We'll be really glad to help you out. And I'm going to put also the mail for if you have any doubts. If there was any question that might have come up later on that you say, oh, I still want to ask this to Jen or to Sharon, please send them. We can always share them again with them. And I think that would be it. Thank you very much. We're here for you for any doubts you have, and I hope you all have a nice evening.
Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.